Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from around the world. Welcome back to Creation Conversations. And by the way, that good morning, good evening, good afternoon that I use every time we do a Creation Conversations, it was first ever done on, I think, our first or second ever Creation Conversations broadcast, back when it was just sort of me and John having a chat. Because even back then, before we'd sort of grown to the size that we are today, with the subscriber count and the like, it was still getting an international audience in, which is why we specifically chose the time of sort of 9 o'clock in the evening in the UK to put these broadcasts out, because it sort of hits the UK about as late as it can go, reasonably, but at the same time it hits the USA sort of bang in the middle of the day. It hits Australia early in the morning, so it's sort of an ideal time all round. We have the whole team with us today, bar John, which will give you an update about what is going on with him in a moment. But we have Craig, Glenn, Sam, and Diane as well. It's great to see you all. Diane, I think you're probably the most recent one to speak to John. So why don't you let us know how you're doing, and also let us know how John's doing.
Well, I'm all right, but John is not. His family, his wife and his grandson, who all live in the same house, of course, have been struck down by a gastro bug, and it's done the rounds from Anne, his wife, to Ben, his grandson, and now it's got to John. So he's not with us because he's not well. So do pray for him, and hopefully he'll be back on his at his usual lively self sometime soon. But yes, yeah. It's very debilitating having that sort of bug. Yes.
Yeah, I spoke to him a little while back, and he didn't sound the greatest back then. And then I know you've spoken to him more recently, and he sounded even worse. So I just got a very sort of groggy text from him a few hours ago, just saying I'm really not doing well here. So yes, please do keep him in your prayers. And it's a shame that he can't join us tonight, because Living Fossils was one of the first ever things that really convinced him about the fallacies of evolution. But he still will be on the show through the medium of a clip which we will be putting up, which is the first ever creation research media production, way back, filmed back in 1989, 1990. So it'll be great to have John, a much younger version.
Yeah, we're doing time travel tonight, guys. Get ready for it.
Absolutely, a much younger version of John on the show. Well, it's great to see everybody coming in on the comments as well. It's great to see you all. Keep the questions and comments coming, because we've got a lot of stuff to fill tonight. But Craig, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm going well. Hi, everybody. It's been a good week of recovering from our trip, which we're going to see a little bit of a clip of shortly. But no, it's been a good week, and everything's going fine here. I haven't got anything too dramatic to report.
Yeah, great stuff. Glenn, how are you doing over in the States?
Doing great. The stomach bug passed through our family, and I managed to avoid it. So I've got the grandkids here, and my son-in-law and daughter, and my wife. A couple of them had it, but I'm doing great.
Come to you and ask you what you've been doing, because we've been having lots of conversations about what you've been doing for creation research in the last couple of days.
Was that directed at me? You cut out.
That was directed at you. Sorry, yes. I was going to say, if you could let us know what you've been doing, because we've had lots of conversations about what you've been doing for creation research in the last couple of days.
Oh, yes. Okay, so update from me. We have been having extensive conversations behind the scenes in regards to the app. And I'm pleased to say that the app has now got the green light. It is going ahead. Me and Joe are having a meeting next week to finalize features and functionality and what we want it to do, essentially. And then from there, we can then initiate it on my day job side in sort of like late next week. And then that should kickstart the process, and the app should be ready before June, if all goes well.
So just run down quickly a reminder of what the purpose or the overarching purpose of the app is.
That would probably be a good idea. And in fact, I'll actually pop up the graphic there. There you go. Any chance I can take to promote the graphic is always good with me. So we're developing a new creation research app and website. The app is coming first. So the app will allow you to stream our live streams and interact with the chat, and also it will enable you to watch any creation research content and any videos that we put out. There'll be free content on there, so all of the stuff that you're accustomed to on our YouTube, you'll be able to watch as part of that. For free. The only thing that you'll require is just to set up an account. So that just means that if you do choose to donate, the donations will get automatically funneled to your nearest ministry. So if you're based in the UK, it'll get funneled to the UK ministry. If you're based in the States or South America, let's say, it'll get funneled to Creation Research USA. And if you're in Aussie land, where everything is upside down, it'll get donated to Creation Research Australia. It's going to be fantastic. We're also going to have a membership option as well. So it'll be like Netflix or Amazon Prime Video or Apple TV Plus or Disney Plus, whatever. And so as part of that, what you can do is you can sign up to the membership and you get a whole library of content that you can stream as part of your membership per month. So this is really going to be the next step for Creation Research in terms of taking in our content.
Yeah, we do have hundreds of hours worth of content, and the plan is to keep on producing that, as we'll talk later. I don't know what's happened to you, Craig.
Well, he said we're upside down, didn't he?
That's
yeah.
We've got cameras that correct it.
Yeah.
That's what it is. That's fine.
Like the eyes.
But what the thing which
oh no, Joe has gone all fuzzy for me.
Fuzzy again. Oh dear.
Yeah. Oh dear.
Is that any better now?
Yeah, you're back now.
That's fine.
One of the things that I'm particularly excited about is the fact that we have our museums project all over the world, and the idea of the app is that it will facilitate a guide through the museums, extra information, extra facilities, all sorts of stuff. So I'm particularly interested in that side of thing. I notice my camera keeps seeming to glitch. I don't know if that's just me or whether that's actually happening for you guys.
It seems to be. I think you just sort of freeze and then you catch up.
Okay. We'll see how we go. Anyway, never mind.
Well, I've also. Shall I give an update as to what I've been doing with my Bible journey as well?
Absolutely, go for that, because people have been following you on your Bible journey.
People want to know. So whoever is joining me on this journey, I've been reading through the Bible from start to finish. I've started on my journey. I'm currently on Genesis chapter 19. I've yet to finish my reading for today. I'm halfway through. It's going well. I've had a little bit of an issue with the New King James translation. It was a little bit more, shall I say, spicy than I was anticipating. I'm used to the ESV version. So unfortunately, I have switched back over to the ESV version for the time being, whilst I'm going through sort of genealogies and archaic sort of things. I'll try and switch back to the NKJV if I can. But it's going really well. I've covered creation of everything with the creation week. I've done Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, got Noah and the flood. We've got also leading up to Abraham, and then God's decision to change Abraham's name to Abraham. We've also had the conception of Abraham's first son via his slave, servant,
handmaiden.
Handmaid, whatever. And so he's just getting on to the whole Sodom and Gomorrah, fire raining down from the sky sort of thing. So that's where I'm currently at. But it's going really well. If you're wanting to join in my journey, please do check out the video that I've put up on our Creation Research YouTube channel, which explains the whole challenge. It'd be really great if we can get people moving and joining me on this journey. There are already quite a few number of people who are joining me on this journey, which is great to see. Really encouraging for me anyway to know that people are doing it alongside me. And I will re-emphasize: audiobooks are allowed. Audio Bibles are allowed. That's fine. That's completely fine. I've listened to an audio Bible, and that's helped me one night when I was really busy, and that I managed to get it in that way. So that's fine. If you've got any preconceptions of, you didn't say audio Bibles in the original video, it's fine. It's all good. But that is my update. And there will be another one next week on next week's Creation Conversations.
Excellent. Great stuff. Yeah. All right. Well, let's go around and do a bit of a ministry report then, because Craig, you've recently been out into the wilderness, and there's a video which runs down some of the details of what you've done. So do you want to just introduce that video for us? And then Sam, if you want to play that and sit back and enjoy.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's my first effort at editing a video, so be kind to me, everybody. But it's just puts a few things together, showing the trip and the great time we had, and out in God's amazing creation down in a wild part of the world that many of you probably haven't been to. So I hope you enjoy it. How you feeling, boys? Just going past Sarah Island. There it is there, the old jetty. The convicts were kept. So our plan was to travel down to Strahan on the west coast of Tasmania and get a boat across Macquarie Harbour with Southwest Wilderness Expeditions down into Birches Inlet and then walk up into the wilderness area to find fossils. We had to transfer via rubber ducky from the main vessel down Birches Inlet to our start point on an old mining trail from probably 1970s, 80s. It's beautiful country, lots of trees lining the inlet, the wilderness waiting before us. The track was a lot thicker than we were expecting. It was very hard walking, especially with the rain on the first day.
Not bad at all.
The bower had completely overtaken the track. Thankfully, a university researcher had gone ahead of us and had helped identify a bit of a narrow track through some of the scrub. 8 or 9 kilometres in, we set up camp on the track a little bit earlier than we'd intended to, but where we knew there was water. Just a little creek had crossed the track and we were able to get water, so that's where we pulled up. Got the typical brown stain of the button grass plains in the wilderness areas of Tasmania, but quite drinkable. Beautiful brown button grass water from Tasmania. The next day we set off to do some fossil hunting. With limited success, we found a few trilobite fragments and a few other shells, gastropods, snails and things like that. This was the main purpose. We came up to have a bit of a hunt for fossils in an area that not many people go looking for them. And we had some luck. The irony is that after 2 days of searching, we hadn't really found fantastic fossils until we started finding some at the actual campsite on the very last night, just before we were going to pack up the next morning and leave back on our way to get picked up by the boat. So it was a real blessing to find that we'd pulled up in a spot where there actually were fossils. And there weren't fossils either side of us for a good 20 or 30 metres that we searched either side of the campsite, and there just simply weren't any fossils. So it just seems that we plonked our camp right where some fossils were found by Morris, our beginner. Some of these fossils we still need to identify. Some of them really do look like trilobites, some of those are like gastropod snails, and there's a whole bunch of them in some of the rocks. You can see them throughout this rock. We've brought some of these home and we'll investigate them more over time. Secular geology records these as Ordovician, which makes them in the order of 400 million years old. We, of course, don't hold to that. We believe that they were all dumped catastrophically as part of Noah's flood, as we find right across Tasmania. The Tasmanian wilderness is full of creatures that can hurt you, including tiger snakes, the fourth deadliest snake on the planet. Saw this guy sitting on the track just ahead of us.
Quite a big fella.
Thankfully he took off. There's jack jumper nests all over the place. These can bite and give you a very severe sting and really stir up. There were inchmen, there were leeches. The march flies were incredible at times. Got a bit of footage of the march flies buzzing around us here. Very annoying flies that can bite as well. There were mosquitoes. There's the march fly's annoying Carl. We're all elated to be out in the Tasmanian wilderness for 4 days, to survive, to be successful finding our fossils. It's good to be back on the boat on the way back to Strong after a fantastic time in God's creation.
There we are, great stuff. Well, hopefully with that little clip and update, it looks like you had a good time, Craig.
No, it's just fantastic. It's great to be out there, sort of trying to be self-reliant for a few days at least in your life, and yeah, it was just great that we've got a Lord to rely on as well, because you know, he pulled us up in the really the only spot we could have got reliable water. Because it was so dense everywhere else. You know, if we had to sort of walk down to a creek somewhere, it just would have been so much work to do that. So, yeah, it was a great time.
Great stuff. Well, I've got some stuff to share a little bit later about what we've been doing in the last little while for ministry in the UK, particularly some of our very interesting finds from the British Museum. But I think we'll come on to that a little bit later. Why don't we, for now, dive into our main topic for this evening, which is, of course, living fossils. And Sam, if you want to put me up to full screen, because these are a couple of fossils which we've acquired in the last couple of days. We've actually got them with us in our visit to London, and it's quite a distinct fossil, and you can probably start to see some of the layers and the layering in this. This is actually what's known as Cotham marble, and it's from Triassic rocks, which refers to the three rock types that you find in the Triassic, and in particular this is known as a stromatolite. So you've actually got these layers with these sort of almost ferny looking things going up to the surface of the rock, which you can see is all sort of knobbly and bumpy, and it's been nicely cut and it's been nicely polished. So what is a stromatolite? Well, I've actually got another example from the same collection, but this is actually Devonian, so again named after the rocks in Devon, right? And nothing to do with millions of years, nothing to do with evolution, everything to do with where they were first studied. So you'll find that rock names, rock types are named after either what they're made up of or where they were first studied. So Devonian, named after the place, Devon, you know, in the UK. Cretaceous means chalk. Jurassic named after the rocks in the Jura Mountains. Ordovician named after the extinct Ordovician tribe in Wales, right? So lots and lots of stuff in context makes a lot more sense. But have a look at this. Let's pull it in nice and close so we can try and get it into focus. There we are, nicely into focus there. Can you see all the layers? So this is Devonian, and I hadn't got any Devonian stromatolites in our museum collection, which is why I particularly picked this one up. But it also was actually collected from Scotland. All right, what are stromatolites? Well, Diane, maybe I'm going to get you to come in and talk about them a little bit, because you're slightly more qualified to talk about stromatolites than I am, seeing as you live in a country where they still live, they still exist. So do you want to let us know what are stromatolites?
Well, stromatolites are genuine living fossils, in fact, that they are living at the time. They are a type of microscopic creature that actually fossilizes itself, because they do extrude a mineral around them, and they literally grow in layers. And so that's what you could see in Joe's fossil there. Lots and lots of beautiful layers. And so these things grow in layers. They grow their own rocks, as it were. So if you go to Western Australia, particularly to a place called Shark Bay, which is full of sharks, but it's also full of stromatolites. And so you can see them living. So it doesn't matter how old you want to make them, they're still alive and still building their little rock layers over in Western Australia now, and in a few other places in the world, but particularly off the shore of Western Australia.
So they really are kind of fossilizing themselves as they go, because they're producing this sort of layering that they're then building up. And one of the great things about that is that it actually makes them extremely distinctive. So you can always tell whether something is actually a stromatolite. Now, stromatolites are unique in the sense that they're one of supposedly the oldest living things, full stop. They're supposedly one of the first things to have ever evolved after life actually was supposed to have started about 4 billion years ago or so, or 3 billion years ago, somewhere between there. And one of the first pieces of life that was supposed to have started are these stromatolite fossils. Now, you can debate whether or not some of the supposedly older stromatolite fossils actually are stromatolites or not. I suspect they're not. I suspect that they are actually like chemical intrusions inside rock layers, because they're nowhere near as well preserved or as distinctive as some of these guys. But regardless, you certainly find stromatolites in some of the oldest fossil-bearing rocks, or the supposedly oldest fossil-bearing rocks, stuff like the Cambrian, right? Now, we're talking about something that's supposed to be 500 million years old, and yet, regardless of that, you still find them alive today. So this gives us a nice introduction to what we are talking about when we're talking about living fossils. And in a moment, I'm going to get Sam to play a video clip after I've got Diane to explain a bit more about this video clip of one of the first ever productions that Creation Research ever did, specifically about living fossils. But before we do that, we've had a look at some real fossil examples, right? We've had a look at some fantastic stromatolite fossils, supposedly some of the oldest fossils on Earth. But before we get into that, another good place to start is, of course, scripture. So I've actually got my Bible here. Half of it has fallen on the floor, never mind. The bit that I need to read is actually right in front of me, so that's okay. I'm going to read to you from Genesis chapter 1, right? Sort of half of Genesis chapter 1, starting from verse 20. Now, Sam will have already read through this in his Bible journey, and you'll probably read through this as well as if you're following Sam's Bible journey. But let me just read this down, because there's some real key points in it. Genesis chapter 1, verse 20, starting from verse 20. Then God said, "Let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth and across the face of the firmament of the heavens." So God created great sea creatures and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded according to their kind, and every winged creature according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." So the evening and the morning were the fifth day. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping things and beast of the earth, each according to its kind." And it was so. Then God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over every cattle, over all the earth, over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over everything that moves upon the earth. Now, it goes on to then obviously talk about God giving the plants to both man and the animals to eat. And it finishes with, of course, God resting on the seventh day. But the one phrase that you will have, the one thing that you will have noticed is that over and over again, it refers to the phrase after its kind, or after their kind, to be created after their kind, to reproduce after their kind. In fact, it says the same about the plants. In fact, 10 times in Genesis chapter 1, God tells living things to reproduce after their own kind. Now, God says something once, you really should pay attention to it. If God says something 10 times in one chapter, he's really trying to drive a point home. So don't be surprised that it was the concept of living fossils, it was the realization that all creatures have done is reproduce after their own kind, just like the Bible says, that first ever actually started to convince John Mackay that perhaps evolution wasn't all what it was cracked up to be. And that led on to not only John actually reading the Bible and becoming a Christian, but also getting to the point when he got involved and started this ministry, Creation Research, which then led on to the first ever production, media production, documentary production for Creation Research, which was called The World of Living Fossils, which you can actually stream on Creation Research Live, and it will be available on the app, and we're going to hopefully redo it as we go forward as well. But Diane, I'm going to ask you to come back up again now, because out of all of us here, we haven't got John with us today, unfortunately, because of his illness. So do please pray for him if you haven't picked up on that yet. John is not doing very well at all. But Diane, I'm going to hand over to you now to give us a little bit of an introduction, because out of all of us here, you were the only one involved in Creation Research at the time and was working in the background of this production. So over to you. Give us a little bit of a rundown as to how Creation Research came to actually produce this documentary and one of the key things that came out of it.
Well, living fossils were known about by that time. In fact, it was actually Charles Darwin, ironically, who coined that term, and it is in the book The Origin of Species. And he described living fossils as being creatures whose fossils are the same as the living examples in the world today. And he thought that they were anomalies. In fact, he specifically says that these are sort of odd things on the fringes of life, as it were, that they're just odd things here and there. Whereas what got John interested, and the rest of us who were working in the creation area at that time, was that, no, they're not odd things at all. In fact, all of the living things that exist on the world today, if there are fossil examples, they are the same. So the world is filled with living fossils. They're not rarities or anomalies, as Charles Darwin described them. They are, in fact, the mainstream, as it were. They're the normal things. And so that's what inspired John to make that particular video. And those of us who were around who did the background research for it and the filming. And so that was our first proper production, a full-length production of a video that we could actually, and it was produced as a videotape. Remember those? Yes,
I do. Yeah, I'm just about old enough.
It's been through quite a few technological changes at the since then. So it really does need to be remade for technical reasons, but also since then. That was back, well, we started it in 89, we finished it, I think, in 1990. More examples have been found. So there is more wonderful evidence that we really would like to add to it. as well as cope with the technical problems of having something that's been rendered into so many different formats over the past 30 years.
I'm sure Sam can explain, because he's tried that. The film was actually not that bad in terms of being able to blow something up to a very large, high quality screen. But as soon as you start capturing it on digital software, the quality starts to go down quite quickly. And of course, once you transfer things over and over and over, because it went from sort of film to tape, and then from tape to digital DVD, and then DVD to MP4, and then off you go, right? So the content, as I was saying earlier, right, like the content is fantastic. The content still holds up today, right? The concept.
Oh yes, indeed.
It's just the fact that technology has moved on, and we've got so many better examples and so many different examples. So we really do want to try and get this all out there if we can. And so one of the plans is to actually remake this, refilm this, reproduce this using not only the wider creation research team. Of course, now we have myself and Craig and Glenn and everybody involved, but also to be able to get John involved as well with some of his collection, because we're sort of, what are we, 35 odd years on now. We've got a lot better things that we can use. So Sam, why don't we have a little bit of a blast from the past? So over to you.
Yes, just a warning to the audience. This does feature some very high socks, some very short shorts, some very 70s upholstery, and a haircut that is very much out of style. But we do hope you enjoy this blast from the past. We hope you enjoy this little excerpt.
Have a good laugh, but enjoy it and learn as well.
Yes, exactly.
It's about 5 minutes long, so enjoy.
There we go.
Textbooks usually proclaim that life has been changing or evolving, and fossils provide some of the best evidence for this. Yet knowledge of the large number of living fossils has been a closely guarded professional secret, with few exceptions, such as this. A coelacanth fish, caught off the coast of Africa just before Christmas Day in 1938, after having been claimed in the textbooks as extinct since the time of the dinosaurs. Many scientists hope to have at last had their hands on an example of an animal evolving from a fish to a frog-like creature. But the coelacanth has been so successful at being a coelacanth, it has not been evolving into anything else. In the time it was supposed to be extinct, in fact in all the time since it first appeared in Devonian rocks, it has faithfully produced replicas of coelacanths. It was and is a living fossil. Devonian rocks form some of the most spectacular scenery on the face of this earth. Places such as Table Mountain in South Africa, or the Catskills in North America, or the Rhineland area of Eastern Europe are all Devonian. They have fossils in them which are similar to the area of Devon in the United Kingdom, where these rocks were first studied. And for those of you who are fishermen, you find it interesting to know that Devonian rocks are full of fish. Apart from that rare and publicised example of a living fossil such as the coelacanth, the existence of vast numbers of such creatures has been one of the best kept professional secrets amongst the world of those who know about fossils. It's been hidden in technical terms, disguised in scientific jargonese. If I was to tell you that Heterodontus japonicus and Rhizocrinus lophatensis were undergoing a period of stasis in their evolution, the only impression I'd leave most of you with is that things are evolving. But what I really said was that the common old Port Jackson shark, which lives in the waters alongside the rather famous Opera House in Sydney, Australia, shows no evidence of evolving and never has. Neither does the sea lily. They are both as stable and unchanging as they've always been. What you're about to see on this program is a world full of creatures whose fossil ancestors are as easy to recognise today as they ever have been. We still have their living descendants with us. Actually, I had some dinosaur food for lunch today. This is what I mean. Grapes. As easy for us to recognise as they would have been for Triceratops, pterodactyls or brachiosaurs, because we have grape leaf fossils in the same rocks as dinosaurs.
And grapes are still with us. They show no signs of ever having evolved. Grapes, tassel ferns, cycads and coelacanths are living fossils. So I dare you to think, as we look at the little-known kingdom of living fossils, it will shatter your views on the evolution of life on this planet. And this tree hasn't evolved either. And the birds love to flock into the huge branches of this tree, which is native to Moreton Bay on the east coast of Australia. And what are they after? Well, the ground is covered with them. These things. Figs. Wild figs. For this is one of the many varieties of figs which is found throughout the world that man has put to use, from laxatives to cookies and desserts. Most people are familiar with the common Turkish fig, so you don't need much in-depth study to recognise this next fossil. That's right, they're fig fossils, and figs have remained the same since they first appeared on this planet. They haven't produced anything except different varieties of figs. Fig fossils are found in what are commonly called Cretaceous rocks. That word is simply a Latin-based term. It was invented in 1822, and it simply means chalky. The reason being that this type of rock was first studied in areas such as the famous white and rather chalky cliffs of Dover. So if you're into fossil food, try a fig. In the middle of the 19th century, a man called Charles Darwin wrote a book about life and fossils. Most people view Darwin as the man who proposed that life had evolved upwards. Worms became fishes. Fish-like creatures grew legs and turned into frogs. And ape-like beings somehow evolved into men. All life had a common ancestor and could be linked bit by bit back to the start. According to Darwin and most evolutionists since then, the evolutionary process has taken vast periods of time and produced a world where change is the only certainty. The modern world has virtually forgotten that before Darwin, Western man was sure that the world and all that was in it had been created by God. Even the geologists who named the basic divisions of the geological column, such as Cretaceous and Devonian, were firmly committed to creation. Their geologic studies had uncovered no fossils that challenged this belief. Although Darwin was not a geologist, he was well aware of fossils. But his belief that life had evolved from a common ancestor meant that he needed to show that fossils linked all creatures together. He wrote about these links in his book, The Origin of the Species. Here's what he said. Why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain. And this perhaps is the most obvious and serious objection which can be urged against the theory. Darwin went on to hypothesize that the reason the evidence for his theory was missing was perhaps that the rock record was not good enough to preserve it. Well, we've had more than 130 years now since Darwin, and the fossils still do not show that life forms have slowly changed from one type to another, and they certainly don't link all life forms back to a common start.
So yes, there you go. A much younger John Mackay. And I have to say, I can say this because he isn't here. His presentation skills have improved since then, I believe, as they all of ours will do as we continue working in this kind of a ministry and teaching, which is excellent. So yes, you can probably tell the content is fantastic, and it really does drive home a really important point. But now that we have much better technology as well as much better fossils and examples, rather than talking about the living example like John did, right? He had the living examples with him. There's a cycad, there's a fig, there's some grapes, and then all of the fossils were sort of stills photos. Whereas now we actually have the fossils in our collection, so we can actually go up and look at them close up. Now, a couple of quick points before we move on to the next segment, where Diane's going to give us some examples of these living fossils, or maybe we'll take some questions before then. But two things sort of come to mind. Number one, if you remember, we've been putting out a series over the last few weeks called Around the Museum with Joe and Diane, which we filmed when Diane Eager was in the UK last year, sort of October time. just off the tail of our big convention, fossil convention, and we had a great time, didn't we, Diane, going around the
We
museum
did indeed, yes.
and filming all sorts of stuff. And so
Yeah.
we've been releasing them over the last few weeks, once every week on Monday evening. So make sure you tune into them as they continue to come out live. But we did do a specific program purely on living fossils. So it's half an hour of just looking at fossil examples, basically, and their modern day equivalent. So I do recommend, that has already come out a couple of weeks back, so I do recommend going back through our YouTube channel, making sure that you're subscribed to our YouTube channel, but also have a look at Around the Museum with Joe and Diane, because that's an excellent resource in general, but specifically the Living Fossils program. So that's great. The other thing is, if you remember, I had these stromatolites earlier, and we can talk a bit more about stromatolites as we go forward, because they are an excellent living fossil example. But if you remember, I actually mentioned that these were supposedly some of the earliest life forms ever to exist on the planet, right? The first things that were supposed to have evolved several billion years ago. And it's worth pointing out that we do hope that John will be well enough to join us next week, because our plan for next week is actually this, the origin of life. I hope you're liking the new graphics from Sam. He's done a great job, and he's much better at this kind of thing than I am. So make sure you join us next week, and Lord willing, we will have John with us. So do keep him in your prayers, because he is not very well at all at the moment with his stomach bug. But if we do have him join us, it'll be a great time to actually go through the origins of life as a program. And if you want some homework to do this week in preparation for that, then you can go onto our YouTube channel again. And one of the first things that was ever put out on our YouTube channel was the Origin of Life series, which was actually filmed for like high school students. So it's a great resource. Again, it's a fairly young John Mackay giving a lecture on chalkboard.
That's an even older blast from the past.
I know, yeah. It's an even younger John Mackay with a chalkboard behind him, so it really shows you how old we're talking. But again, it's got some really great content on it, and it'll be slightly more up to date next week as we do our living fossils one. So there we go. Anyway, great stuff. Why don't we have a couple of questions before we dive into the next section, Diane, and we can do your presentation and then have a look at some of the research which I've been doing over the last little while. So Sam, over to you for some questions.
Yeah, sure. We've had already had some questions in, and they're all relevant to what we've been discussing so far, which is great. Keep the questions coming. Make sure you put Q before your question so I can see it. It makes my job a heck of a lot easier. So if you have a look at this question from Shelley, she said, I've heard that Mary Ellen Jasper is actually a stromatolite fossil. Is that true?
If it's Jasper, I don't know specifically Mary Ellen Jasper, but if it's Jasper, then it is very likely to be stromatolitic. Because you have a few different. See, the problem with the term stromatolite is it's lots of stuff gets dumped in with stromatolite, right? There are some stromatolites which I'm fairly convinced are just purely chemical solutions. There are some stromatolites which I'm convinced are just the specific way that water goes. There was something going around on social media, TikTok thing, where if you get really dry sand, right, and pour water right in the middle, it actually helps to glue the sand together. And then when you take the dry sand away, you lift something up and it looks identical to what is often purported to be a stromatolite, right? And if you look at a lot of stromatolites, some of them you will struggle to find any conclusive evidence of biological in origin, right? As opposed to some of the stuff like the Coffin marble, which is very, very distinct and very certainly biological in origin, or our Devonian one. When it comes to some of the jaspers and stuff, they are often stromatolitic, but rather than being something like stromatolite that you'd see today off the coast of Australia, or like some of the Coffin marble ones, what they tend to be is algal mats, which are trapping sediment rather than producing or secreting minerals. And so you'll have these algal mats which are probably being sort of brought together, or you've got a solution which is coming together, or a biological or organic solution which is trapping sediment as these rock layers are actually being formed. So I suspect that if it is a jasper, I'd need to look it up. But I could do that in a moment while Diane or somebody else comments. But I suspect that it probably is stromatolitic, but probably more sort of sediment silt trapping rather than producing its own sediment. Any of the other team have any thoughts on Jasper?
Other than that, it has the quite distinctive striations, so that's why it's sometimes lumped into that category.
I'm just looking up Mary Ellen Jasper is a rock found in Minnesota that consists of red jasper and silver hematite. Well, hematite certainly isn't stromatolitic.
No, it's
The jasper is purported to be a fossil, a layered structure built up by sediment trapping algae. Yeah, so it's one of those ones in the middle where it might be stromatolitic in terms of its algae. It could be an algal mat which is trapping silt, but I suspect it's more likely going to be some kind of an organic solution that is building up layers, because you find the same layers, say, in flint, right? Now flint is a silica based rock, yet it is organic in origin, unlike a lot of silica based rocks, because a lot of silica based rocks like obsidian are volcanic, right? But flint is interesting because it's an organic based rock, because the silica actually comes from fossils, but you still have a chemical solution that is part of it, as you end up with these layers. We call it banded flint, right? And you end up with all these layers, and unless you knew what you're looking at, you could be mistaken for thinking this is some kind of stromatolite, right? Is it a fossil? Well, it depends on what your definition of a fossil is. It's originally biologic in origin. It's originally organic in origin because it comes out of the coccoliths, the tiny little seashells and the sponges and stuff like that. But by the time it actually fills up a cavity and begins the chemical process of turning into flint, it's not really biological anymore, right? It's actually now purely a chemical solution. So sometimes you get bogged down with terminology, and you need to know a little bit about your geology to understand where it's actually come from. So I suspect that this Mary Ellen Jasper is, yes, partly you could argue it's biologic, partly you could argue it's a stromatolite, but also, is it really? It's more likely an organic solution, which is now trapping silt and building up these layers in the rock as it forms.
I've just added a picture of that's Mary Ellen Jasper, apparently. Very pretty.
Yeah, well, you can see the layers. So it's the layers which will be the purported stromatolite, but the silver stuff will be that hematite, right? Which certainly isn't biologic in origin. In fact, I believe hematite is a volcanic-based mineral. Yeah, I suspect that's more likely going to be a chemical solution than actually a purely biological thing that you see off the coast of Australia, because these stromatolites which you see off the coast of Australia, which you can easily match up to things like the your Cotham marble and stuff, they are actually producing rock. They are effectively fossilizing themselves as they grow, kind of thing. So I think there's slight differences in between that and what we're looking at with this Jasper. So there you go. Any more questions, Sam?
Yes, we've had one come in from Shogiwa. Shogiwa says, John suggested that grapes were food for Triceratops, spelling, because they are in the same rock formations.
Yeah.
Do you think this is a valid argument? Or do you still think this is a valid argument, rather?
Well, the one thing that you can certainly come to the conclusion of is that they existed at the same time. Right? If you've got them being buried together, that's part of the whole point of living fossils, is that no matter how far back you go, you find them in the same rocks as even things that have gone extinct, like the dinosaurs. Diane?
Yes. It's to do with the supposed age of the grape leaves and the dinosaurs. They're supposedly in the same rock layer era in the evolutionary timetable. And in fact, they're finding more and more plants supposedly in the dinosaur era. If you look on our fact file, there's a story there called "Did Dinosaurs Stop to Smell the Flowers?" So it's all to do with are they found in rock layers that are considered to be the same evolutionary age?
Yeah. Any thoughts on the rest of the team?
That so many of the fossils are mixed ecosystems that don't coincide, so there's no way to tie them in, exactly.
Great stuff. All right, final question, if we've got one, before we move on to the next section.
We do indeed. This one comes from Sandy. Sandy asks, are all fossils from the flood?
Right, we could be here for a while.
Do you want to come back to it?
Well, how about we partially answer it and then we can come back to it later.
Okay.
One thing that I would suggest is that you check out, I think it was on Standing for Truth, we did a 2-part series about the boundaries of the flood. And we were specifically asked, where is the flood post-flood boundary in, can you get the geological column and draw a nice line across it going, there's the pre-flood, or there's the flood rocks, there's the post-flood rocks, right? And basically the whole program was first and foremost dealing with the fact that you simply can't do that with the geological column, because number one, the geological column doesn't exist anywhere on planet Earth. You have to sort of piece it together, which is what geologists have traditionally done from different locations on Earth. So you have to be very careful when you are going, right, are these fossils from the flood? Are these fossils not from the flood? And towards the end, we had a look at some very specific clues, which you really have to go through piece by piece and ask questions like, okay, well, what evidence do the fossils show? Are they brilliantly preserved, or have they got evidence of being scavenged and, they're not particularly, well preserved, or they've been rotting away or lying around for a bit before they've got buried? You can also ask questions about the size of the beds, right? So, for instance, if you go to Jurassic Ark and dig up the fossil logs, you're talking about a deposit which takes up to, covers a third of Australia. Right, that's a big flood. If you look at the Chattanooga Shale, which is not too far away from where Glenn is in Tennessee, right, that covers something like a third of North America up into Canada as well, right? That's a big flood. So you can very easily work out which fossils are from the flood, but it's a bit trickier to work out which ones are definitely not from the flood. Whereas if you come, say, down to where we're going tomorrow we're leading a field trip, right, to the Isle of Sheppey, and you have the London Clay. Now, the London Clay is a relatively large deposit. It goes from pretty much where we are in the Isle of Sheppey on the east coast, right, in Kent, and it goes down through Kent, and it turns up, it's up in Essex, and it turns up a little bit lower in the UK as well. So it's a fairly sizable deposit, right? It covers a few hundred square miles, but that's still fairly small on the scale of a global flood. So there's debate over, is this from the global flood, or is this from a post-flood flood, like an ice age kind of induced flood? But then if you go down to the Isle of Wight, there's a tiny little basin where you've got a tiny little deposit which is only a couple of miles square, right? And the evidence is that the fossils have been lying around and scavenged a lot before they've actually ended up being buried by slumping, silt and sediment that's been pushed down by the ice. So there, purely because of the size and the lack of detailed preservation, you're looking at fossils that are from a post-flood catastrophe, and a local one. It certainly is a local one, right? So you can very easily work out which ones are definitely from post-flood. You can very easily work out which ones are definitely on a global scale. It's when you get to the middle ones, right? Where's the post-flood, the flood post-flood boundary? Is it somewhere in the Cenozoic? Is it somewhere even lower? Is it somewhere even higher, right? There's even some arguments that it's up as high as the Pleistocene, right? Which is sort of like the Ice Age deposit. So it's a big debate, but the simple question is no, not all fossils are from the flood. They are, a fossil is something that is preserved in stone. You can make fossils today, right? And we see fast fossils. We've got examples of fast fossils, but you do need to know a little bit about geology and know how to ask the right questions if you want to work out which are the ones from the flood for sure. And that's part of the reason why we do these programs and why we do the documentaries, and also why we take people out on field trips, because we get them to ask the questions for themselves, right? Which are the, how did these fossils get here? Where does the evidence actually lead you? Any other comments from the team?
Yeah, Joe, that may have arisen because of what I said in the little clip I did on the West Coast there, that the fossils that we've found we believe to have come from Noah's flood, and they're Ordovician. That's widespread Ordovician geology in that area. Yeah. So my assumption, and not being a geologist, maybe it was a big assumption, but my assumption was that most logically they are from the flood. Would that be
Yeah,
right?
so the Ordovician is a global deposit, right? The Ordovician rocks are found all over the world, and it's pretty much the same kind of mega sequence. So we dig up Ordovician stuff here in the UK. It's where it was first named, right, in Wales after the Ordovici tribe, which was a Celtic tribe, which the Romans basically killed off, made extinct. And so when the first geologists were studying the rocks, they found these extinct little bugs called trilobites, right? And so they ended up naming the rocks after the extinct tribe because of the extinct trilobites that they found inside the rocks, right? And they called them the Ordovician rocks. And I've dug up Ordovician stuff in Australia, in New South Wales. You've dug them up, Craig, in Tasmania. And we've even dug up Ordovician stuff over near Carthage in Tennessee. So you find the Ordovician stuff all over the world. So again, definitely looking at a global flood deposit for sure.
And I know that some of those trilobites on the west coast of Tasmania have actually been compared to American and other trilobites around the world.
Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the reasons why I know it's all the same sort of mega sequence, the same kind of deposit. So great stuff. Well, let's move on to our next segment. Let's take a mild break from the world of living fossils, because I want to share a rather exciting find that we came across here in the UK. And I'll do sort of my little sort of ministry update as well before we then go over to Diane for her presentation. So I've been on a bit of a ministry trip the last few days. We had our, we obviously spent a lot of time over Christmas and sort of the New Year period and getting the museum set up and running and sorting all of that kind of stuff out. But we're back on the road again for a little while, and we've got more plans to hit the road as well. And we've got a field trip tomorrow to the Isle of Sheppey, which I've already mentioned. So you get good crabs and lobsters and all sorts of stuff from there. So I'm very much looking forward to that. But one of the reasons why I was quite pleased that the ministry trip led me into the London area is because I'd been wanting to go and see a new exhibition at the British Museum. So every so often the British Museum puts a new exhibition on, right? This is the big British Museum with all of the artifacts and stuff from all over the world. And their particular exhibition this period, this term, was hieroglyphs, right? You know, the Egyptian writing. And they get a lot of their famous artifacts from inside the British Museum, such as the Rosetta Stone and stuff like that, and they put them on display with extra information, but they also get a load of other interesting things from other museums from all over the world, including the big Egyptology Museum in Egypt, right, and come and put it all on display as part of this special exhibition. So it's well worth going to see it, because you get to see stuff that you'd have to travel a very long way to see otherwise, and you see stuff that's not normally on display. And it was actually saw that this was up there on a Bible archaeology discussion group, and I thought I've got to go and see it for myself because it's absolutely fascinating. So let me just put all this up now, and I'll let you know what we're actually looking at. British Museum finds House of Jacob. Ooh. So this is a little Egyptian scarab beetle. So scarab beetles were revered in the ancient Egyptian world, and they were also associated with naming. And so what you can see here is the underneath of the scarab beetle, and you've got lots of decoration around the edge, but in the middle you've actually got a cartouche. Now a cartouche is a name plate, basically. It's a symbol which talks about a person, so belonging to the house of whoever. And the interesting thing about this is that it bears a Hebrew name. There's sort of an accumulation of Paleo-Hebrew and Egyptian symbols which have been brought together to mean Jacob. And the house bit is contested, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Here's the scarab beetle again, and I've put in the sort of transliteration, the English words into what it's talking there, so you can see YYAQQB, which is your Jacob or Jacob, and then down the bottom you have R. Now the R is interesting because in the Egyptian world, P is very similar to the Paleo-Hebrew R, and in Egyptian, PR put after or before a name refers to the house of. So it's a strong indication that this is actually a sort of an amalgamation or an approximation, if you like, of the PR in Egyptian, because you've got a P and an R which are very, very similar in ancient Egyptian and Paleo-Hebrew. And so as a result, you've got this symbol which basically means house of. So you have something which refers to the house of Jacob. And this was actually put in the British Museum in a section where they talked about foreigners, foreign sort of important people who had come into Egypt and been given sections of Egypt. And the account goes that there was actually a section given to the house of Jacob, which of course we know the children of Israel moved into Egypt, so it would make sense that Joseph is effectively the prime minister at the time, second in command to Pharaoh. The Pharaoh would have given the house of Jacob a area of land, which is where the children of Israel eventually basically settled and stayed for it was around 300 years. Until, of course, Moses comes along and leads them into the promised land. So you have some great evidence. It fits, the dating fits as well with the revised sort of biblical chronology, because you do have to do a bit of revision simply because it's already been shown, the Egyptian chronology, to be a bit of a mess. But if you have a look at things like patterns of evidence and stuff like that, and some of the difference in the Egyptian chronology, and line that up with the books by Dr. John Osgood, which Creation Research have and sell, they're fantastic. And the dates line up really, really well with this scarab beetle, with the name and with the house of reference and with the dating belonging to the biblical patriarch Jacob. So it's a fascinating piece of evidence which we've film a little bit, and that will go out on YouTube in some shorts as we go forward. Right next to this scarab beetle was this one, which actually bears the Egyptian name of Joseph, which is really interesting. And you've got an extra little bit of correlation with this as well, because that cartouche in the middle is also found with the name, the Egyptian name for Joseph is also found on a great big stele, right, which is basically like a big plaque in ancient Egypt, where it has this name, and it gives us a little bit of extra evidence that this is referring to Joseph, because it talks about him being in the same house of Jacob, but also it has reference to his son, and the son's name is Manasseh. Now, we of course know that Joseph had a son, and his son was called Manasseh. In fact, Manasseh was one of the sons that was blessed by Jacob, one of Joseph's sons that was blessed by Jacob. So the fact that you have this stele with this name on it, with the reference to the son, who is Manasseh, and you find this scarab beetle as well, it's one of the strongest contenders we have for a scarab beetle, which is actually referring to Joseph, the biblical Joseph, right? Coat of many colors. So right next to each other, without bizarrely actually mentioning it, but you can find this in other sources, the British Museum have actually put together two scarab beetles, one of which is almost certainly refers to the biblical Jacob, and the other one is the best contender we have for referring to the biblical Joseph, and the sort of circumstantial evidence actually stacks up quite nicely in favor of that, particularly with the other references that we have as well. So really exciting to see that you can have these kind of biblical biblically referenced, biblically important artifacts on display in the British Museum. We're probably never going to be able to get hold of some of these to put in our museum, but that's why we visit these museums and actually provide this kind of evidence. But it's also one of the reasons why we do have plenty of artifacts now in our own museum collection, which we're hoping to be able to spread around the world as well, because it really does bring this kind of whole period to life, right? This biblical archaeology to life. And we've reminded people many, many times that when we refer to biblical archaeology, we're not just referring to the archaeology of Bible lands, because that's what a lot of people take biblical archaeology to mean. And of course, you have to ask yourself, well, what do you mean by Bible lands? Lands that are mentioned in the Bible, or people that are mentioned in the Bible? Well, you automatically think of the Holy Land, right? You think of Israel and Palestine and the promised land that God sent his people into. But if you think about it, the Bible talks about more lands and more people than just the Holy Land, right? It also talks about the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Persians, which occupied modern-day Iraq and Iran and out into the sort of, the Sinai Peninsula. And of course, it mentions Egypt, which goes into Africa. And then Paul, the Apostle Paul, he went into Europe, to Greece and to Cyprus and to Rome. So all of a sudden, your biblical archaeology becomes a lot wider. But if you really think about it, the Bible is not just a history of salvation. It's not just a history of the Holy Land. It's actually a history of the whole world and all the peoples from beginning to end, from creation to the flood, to the dispersion at the Tower of Babel, to the table of nations in Genesis chapter 10, and the promise of a savior, the savior who did come, and the promise that this savior is going to come back once again. And so really, biblical archaeology is the whole of archaeology, all of archaeology, the whole thing, the whole study of humans, but from a biblical perspective. And so part of the reason why we do these artifacts is not just to show evidence and credibility for scripture, but also to help give the big picture of all kinds of people, all people groups, all races, all tribes, all nations from a biblical perspective, which is why we have stone tools. It's why we have stuff from the Holy Land. It's why we have stuff from the Anglo-Saxons. It's why we have stuff from Egypt. It's why we have stuff from China, right? All sorts of stuff, but put on display with the biblical picture and the biblical point of view. So I think we did a biblical archaeology program on Creation Conversation in the past. It'd be good to do one again going forward, because there is always so much that we can actually talk about and deal with. So there we go, some rather fascinating little insights into some of the things that we've been doing in the last few days, and hopefully that's been beneficial for you.
Oh,
it's an exciting time
it's
an exciting time for biblical archaeology, I think.
It really is. It really is.
Brilliant find.
All right. Let's go over to you now, Diane, for your segment. If you remember, we started by discussing our living fossil stromatolite, right? We've had a blast from the past with the living fossils from John. If you've joined us since then, a reminder that John is not with us today because he's very unwell with a stomach bug, so please do pray for him. But we had a great fun time looking at a very young John Mackay talking about some living fossils, which was the first ever production on living fossils. And actually, if you do get the DVD or you do stream it, or when the new app is available, you watch it on the app, you will see that it starts off by John Mackay down in the swamp by the beach, pulling out some seeds out of his pocket and looking to see what those seeds will grow into. And the kind of plant that those seeds will grow into is actually where Diane's going to start now. So Diane, over to you, and I'll let you take it away with the next section on living fossils.
Yes, thank you. I'd forgotten that you were away from the main museum, because I was hoping that either you or John would be able to hold up a fossil of a cycad.
We haven't done well with both of us being away, but never mind.
Yes. And no, if I'd had my wits about me, I would have got a photo of one of them as well. But the point of making that original old video was to make the point that John had come to understand, that living fossils were not just anomalies, as Charles Darwin put it. In fact, the world was filled with living fossils, because the living things we have today are the same as the living things that were created, as Joseph read out from Genesis 1. Therefore, if there are fossilized versions, it's no surprise that they are the same as the living ones. So the world is filled with living fossils, and all the things we look at are living fossils. And when we found the fossils at our Jurassic Ark site, which is full of these big logs, which we can now identify as Araucaria pines or southern pine trees, we decided, well, we will plant some of these living ones in the garden. And perhaps if we can just go to my slides now.
There you go. Your
And
slides are up on the screen here, so there you go.
that's good. Yes. So this is the living fossil garden where we've planted a number of trees that are like the fossil ones, which are only a few yards away from where that photo is. And you can see they're mainly pine trees, but there are also some other ones there because we thought, well, there are other examples of living fossils. So we'll plant other specimens of those, and you can see some palm trees there. And you can see we've actually taken one of the fossil logs and upended it and glued it together. That was quite an interesting process. It was a bit like a three-dimensional jigsaw, and put it there in the garden. So that's that object that's sitting there at the front. And those little plaques are actually tributes to people who have contributed to either putting this all together or who have donated money for us to continue this project. And as you can see, we've got a dinosaur in there as well, because people love dinosaurs, but they're also appropriate because they are considered to be of similar evolutionary age to the living fossils we have here. But as they're dead, we won't go into them. We will stick with the living fossils. And the supposedly oldest living fossil is the cycad. So we do have some cycads in our living fossil garden. We also have them scattered around the site because we were given a most wonderful gift of a whole lot of mature cycads from a local plant nurseryman. And you can see in the center of that, there is a cone. They're cone plants, and they actually have male and female plants. Now, I'm not quite sure how that's going to work these days. We have to rename male and female human beings. Are they going to expect us to rename the male and female cycads? Anyway, that's another whole issue. But this is the cone of a female plant. And they grow quite well in Australia in the conditions that we have, but I have seen them in other places. And in fact, one of them was at Kew Gardens. They had this rather weedy looking specimen there, but they had only just planted. This was in a set of gardens that they have at Kew Gardens called the Evolution Garden. And so the reason the cycad was planted there was because it is considered to be a very old fossil or old living fossil. That is, if you look at their sign there, it says, right, slow growing cycads, approximately 280 million years. Well, that's not as old as the stromatolites that Joseph held up there. But for a fossil plant, that is a long time for something to be multiplying after its kind. And you can see in the center of that plant there's a cone that's probably a male cone. So we have female and male plants, and they have been reproducing. And mind you, like other plants, that they produce pollen. So they do actually need pollinators, which is another interesting aspect of them as well. What was their pollinators back in those times? Well, it's not a problem if you understand the biblical history of the world, because God made the pollinators very quickly after he made the plants. So he made whole functioning ecosystems by the end of the creation week. So even if that time did exist, that means that these plants have been multiplying after their kind, and the fossil specimens are the same as the living specimens. But there are other things which we don't think of as living fossils, but their fossils are the same as what we have today. And as we've looked through the science news that we keep an eye on over the last few decades, every now and again we come across scientists have discovered some sort of fossil, and they are surprised how much it looks like the living ones. So here are a few living examples of things which we don't think of as living fossils, but when fossils of them were discovered, scientists have expressed surprise. Some of them might be familiar. Have you heard of these little creatures? Now, they're a bit hard to see there. Can you see those spindly little creatures there? They're often called daddy long legs and are thought of as a spider. They are an arachnid, but they're not a true spider. and they haven't changed either. A while ago, 2003, okay, so 20 years ago, we're really having blasts from the past today, aren't we? Fossils found in the Rhynie Chert in Scotland. Joseph, you would have been there, and I know that John has. Okay, 400 to 412 million years, according to the evolutionary dating system. And this is a quote from the authors who wrote up this fossil. These remarkable and surprisingly modern-looking fossils. Now, you'll find that word surprising come up quite a few times. And they were able to study this fossil using the sort of scanning techniques that we have in the 21st century now, where we can scan fossils without actually cracking them open and destroying them. And you find all sorts of amazing detail. And they found the breathing tubes and reproductive organs of these creatures, that it looked exactly the same as the ones that are crawling around at the moment. And they've found other fossils of these. There's another one which was found fossilized in amber, actually 100 million years ago. Arachnid, just meaning like a spider, looked like it might have died last year. Now look at the comments that the BBC made. The harvestmen hit on a successful evolutionary design. They cannot avoid that word, and we'll probably do some programs on design. There's lots of wonderful evidence and interesting things we can do on that. So evolutionary design, bit of a anomaly there. Fairly early on, in other words, however old we want to make them, this is how they have been designed, and they do look designed, has changed rather little over the past few 100 million years, right? Things are not changing. They're multiplying after their kind. So when you find fossils of them, they haven't changed. And now, how's this for a headline? This is about another creature which is a bit obscure. This was a headline in the Science News Service. Now, there is a journal called Science, which is produced by the American Association for the Advancement of Science. So I haven't given them enough. I haven't given them enough A's, I notice there in my caption there. So AAAS they should be. There is also a magazine called Science News, so it's a bit confusing. So that's why in our fact file and our news reports, I do usually put that in brackets afterwards to say this is the news service that goes out to the general public that is related to the journal Science, which is put out by AAAS. But anyway, this was their headline. I mean, we couldn't have said it better. Crustaceans against change. Fossil reveals 425 million year history of resisting innovation. And what this fossil was about, or what this article was about, were these little creatures called ostracods, which are tiny, weeny little creatures. Now they're almost microscopic. They're just sort of on the edge of vision. Although John recently found some fossils of these which were much bigger. So that's another thing we might talk about in one of our later programs. There are some changes in the fossil record, but none of them are changing from one kind to another. They're all to do with things getting smaller or dying out or degenerating. But here are some comments that were written about these fossil ostracods. This is a demonstration of unbelievable stability. Now, that's another word you'll come across in the reports of these things which haven't changed, is stability or stasis. And watch out for that one, because stasis literally means staying the same, as in stability. So not changing. And the comment that was made in this news report was the new fossil indicates the basic ostracode body plan. There are a whole lot of these, so ostracods, ostracodes. The basic ostracode body plan was already present in the Silurian period. Now that's back in the 425 million years, according to the evolutionary timetable. Now, again, that's another one of those terms that's been hijacked by the evolution. The Silurians were another one of those Celtic tribes. So Silurian refers to fossils that were found originally in Great Britain near Wales. So you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, Joseph. The Silurians, where did they live? Anyway, they were
Scottish. I think it's a Scottish tribe, if I remember correctly.
Scottish tribe, right? Yeah. So I knew it was Celtic. So either one or the other. But anyway, they refer to a place. They don't refer to millions of years or time. That has been added to those names after they were originally coined, and so it refers to the rocks that were found in this particular place where the Silurian tribe used to live. So again, don't be afraid to use those terms, but know what they mean and be prepared to explain them. A lot of them refer to places, others are more descriptive terms like Cretaceous, meaning chalky. So really, really old in the evolutionary timetable, but if they haven't changed, they haven't evolved. So they're no help to the theory of evolution, no matter how you want to classify them in terms of time or in terms of rock layers. Now, here are a couple of things that you might not think of as living fossils that are a little bit more obvious. These are fairly more microscopic creatures or just on the edge of vision, but I'm sure you've seen some pelicans. I love pelicans. I often go to the coast where I have relatives, and there are lots of pelicans that live around here. And I also live near a lake, and sometimes the pelicans will fly inland and we see them landing on our lake, and then they disappear to fly further inland into Australia. And there was a report about a fossil pelican a while ago, and which we have reported in our news reports here. And this is the heading of their article. The earliest known pelican reveals 30 million years of, now notice that term there, evolutionary stasis. Now, again, that's a contradiction in terms. Evolution is a theory about how things change. Stasis means stay the same. So we have a theory of things that stay the same, or a theory of things that change, revealing stasis, revealing how things stay the same. Doesn't make sense at all. And particularly interesting in pelicans, of course, are their beaks. You've all heard the old joke, right? The wondrous bird is the pelican. Its beak can hold more than its belly can. And so when they found a fossil pelican, which actually did have its beak preserved, they were surprised that, wow, the pelican beak just looks like a living pelican beak. And this is the BBC reporting what surprised them most was that this ancient pelican is almost identical to modern species. So nothing's changed. It's genuine stasis, but it's not evolutionary stasis. It's after their kind stasis. Things have stayed the same. That fossil was the same as the living ones. So even pelicans qualify as living fossils. And the BBC article went on to say the discovery surprised the researchers because it revealed just how little pelicans have evolved over huge expanses of time. And another one you probably don't think of as a living fossil are hummingbirds. And here was a report about a hummingbird that we reported back in 2004. These things are still in our fact file. You can go looking for them. It's quite a big archive now. We've been collecting them for about 20 years. So, Old World fossil record of modern type hummingbirds. And this referred to a hummingbird fossil that was found in Germany. Now, it's not quite as old as the stromatolites or the cycads, okay, 30 to 34 million years. Oldest in the evolutionary timetable, only a fraction of that. But in terms of the life cycle of living things, that is an extremely long time if you think of how long a hummingbird lives, which are or how long a pelican lives. I mean, we're talking about sort of years and decades. We're not talking about millions of years. So they are extraordinary long periods of time that sort of disappear into the dim distance in terms of the life cycles of these things. So there's an awful lot of reproducing after their own kind, even if that time didn't even if that time did exist. So what was said about this thing, and what was it called? Well, it was given this wonderful name. Isn't that wonderful name? Eurotrichilus inexpectatus. Now notice the species name. All right. And this is how the scientist who wrote this up described. If you name a fossil, or if you are entitled to name a fossil, which other words, it's something new that you can give it a new species name, you do have to explain what the name means. So here is the explanation, right? Euro for Europe, that's fairly obvious. Trochilus is the genus of modern hummingbirds, and the specific name, meaning the species name, is derived from the Latin inexpectatus, for the unexpected. In other words, this was a surprise. Now notice how modern day scientists with their evolutionary mindset keep on being surprised by finding fossils that are the same as living things, whereas we're not. So inexpectatus for unexpected, and refers to the surprising occurrence of modern type hummingbirds in Europe. And there was a lovely commentary, and that's an interesting thing in itself, that this hummingbird was found in Europe. They don't live in Europe these days unless they've been imported. They are considered to be native to North America. But again, that's another story that we can talk about some other time. But there was this lovely comment about this fossil. The amazing thing about this fossil is that it is essentially a modern hummingbird. My mind is a little blown. So are your minds blown? Well, if you believe in the Bible, your minds aren't blown. Having a modern type hummingbird buried in the rocks and living hummingbirds flying around, particularly beautiful creatures, right? Our minds aren't blown at all. And hopefully your minds won't be blown either. And if we can come back to us now, that's the end of the slideshow. If anyone would like to make any comments about this, but just a reminder that the world is filled with living fossils. They're not anomalies at all. Charles Darwin was wrong about that just as much as he was wrong about various other things. And Glenn, you live in North America. Have you seen any hummingbirds?
Yes, and in fact, I've been where you catch the hummingbirds and you put a band on them so that you can track them.
Oh, yes.
That's really amazing that you can have a band that small to be on hummingbirds. So yes,
yes, they're tiny.
They're
yes.
Tiny. Yes.
It's great stuff.
Joe, I went and came back, and it seems the power of me turning my camera back on has caused Joe to turn his on.
I'm not sure what's going on. Do you still hear me?
I can still hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I'm not entirely sure what's going on, to be honest with you. I'll try and get my camera working back again. But anyway, as long as you can hear me, that's the important thing. We're coming on to about an hour and a half of content, so it's probably time to do some questions if nobody else has any comments. Actually, no, before we do that, Craig, you were going to have a look at some of the real life living fossil examples that you've got with you.
Yes, Craig has some beautiful actual specimens to show.
Maybe do that while I try and sort out what's going on.
Those.
Okay, yeah, well, I briefly showed these via slide quite some shows ago, but I've just been collecting these so we can hopefully build up a decent display at the museum. But there's a Jurassic sea urchin and a modern one, so you can just see how similar they are. And Jurassic is obviously time of dinosaurs, so I'm guessing that's 60 million years plus. I'm not particularly accurate with some of these dates, but that's in that order, I believe. 60 odd million years, is that right, Joe? Unchanged.
Jurassic's a bit older than that, but either way, that is a beautiful pair of sea urchins. Haven't changed a bit.
Well, it's one of the most powerful displays at our museum is the living fossils, because you can just raise the question to people immediately. If things aren't changing over that vast period of time, which sometimes just rolls off the tongue, but is actually a vast period of time to consider, 60, 70 million years, and nothing's changing, well, you've got to ask an honest question: are things actually changing at all? And this one's actually hard to tell which one's actually the fossil. You know, I can tell, but it's probably very hard for people there to tell. It's actually, this one is the fossil. It's a lot heavier. It's turned to rock. This one's just a bleached shell that we've got from Tasmania here. So if I can maybe sort of show them that way as well. Going off the camera there.
Yeah, that's good. Yes.
So you can see they're very similar. I've got quite a collection of these that I'm starting to get together in the shell world. So there's another one. Again, very difficult to tell which one's the fossil and which one's not, but this one is actually the fossil. And again, purchased as being millions of years old. Here's another one here. This is a cowrie. So this is the fossil cowrie. There's lots of cowries, so I haven't probably got the exact match with that, but it gives you the idea how much of cowries changed over millions of years. Not a great deal. And perhaps one of my more spectacular ones in terms of a shell is this guy. This one's dated in the Pliocene. So that one's there.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And this one's an actual fossil without the sort of branches snapped off.
I love the colour of those branches. They're beautiful.
Yeah, that's right. They're lovely shells. We actually sell a lot of these shells in our gift shop, which is one of the ways I can get a hold of them. But so this is just a small example of a vast number. And as I say to people at the museum, we could actually fill a warehouse full if we had the money, and the resources and the space. We could fill a warehouse full of living fossils. It's incredible. And we've just purchased a great new one as well, the octopus fossil that John showed on the show. Was it last, it might have been 2 weeks ago. He showed a fantastic octopus fossil. So that one's been purchased, is held now by Creation Research as another fantastic example. I can't remember the age that one was supposed to be. But again, octopuses haven't changed over time. And as Carl Werner says in his Grand Experiment videos, you can get fossils from every major group of plants and animals on the planet alive today, represented in the fossil record.
Great stuff. Fantastic.
We lost Joe completely, have we?
Yeah, well, the more observant among you in the chat will notice that we have lost Joe. He's texted me his laptop is overheated. So he's not going to be returning, I don't think, for the remainder of the stream. But thank you so much for that, Craig. It's really interesting to see just by walking down the beach, just how many things you can find that are basically living fossils. I remember going off to holidays in Greece and Crete and picking up sea urchin, hollowed out shells and things like that, and grabbing bagfuls and taking them on the plane home, and it just sort of blows your mind a little bit, really, when you think those shells just haven't changed in all that time. It's really interesting.
Well, another thing I think is that people just completely forget very quickly how amazing it is to find a living fossil. I was up near when the Wallamai pine was found in the 1990s. I worked nearby in that area. That was like finding a living dinosaur in the plant kingdom. And the Wallamai is just sort of northwest of Sydney. I worked sort of north of Sydney, so pretty close by. And it was just an incredible find, and people were incredibly excited. But now it's just another one of those things. Yeah. So it's from before the time of the dinosaurs. these southern pines, and they found them living. It's literally like finding living dinosaurs. It should just be enough to blow people away that things are not evolving, but we soon forget it, like the coelacanth and like other examples of that.
Yeah. Great stuff. So in lieu of Joe not being here, I thought we would sort of finish off with a few questions.
Yes.
So it might be worth, I mean, believe it or not, Glenn, we have a question directed to you specifically in your area of expertise. So this comes from Hive Science. They say, what is soil? So please give us the explanation. What is it? We need to know.
You know, being involved in soil science, being a fellow in the Soil Science Society, you would think I would have a good answer for you. But it's something that actually in the Soil Science Society we have debated. When I studied soil science, it was that stress that soil was a living matter. So it was more than just a porous media made up of the different grain sizes. It had to be biologically active. And that was the definition for decades, that soil, the distinction is that it's so biologically active. It's got microorganisms as part of it and organic matter. The problems come in more recently over the last decade that we've debated about it because of the research on soils on the moon, Mars, other celestial objects. And in fact, when I was in graduate school, my professor got moon dust in for me to do some research on. And so the question is that soil, since it doesn't have biological activity? I think the important thing is, from my perspective, keep in mind that, of course, about 70% of the Earth's surface is water. But of the remaining 30% in creation research, we tend to talk about geology, rocks, but 50% of that land surface is soil. And so it's an important factor. It's the part of the surface that is still porous, it's not consolidated, and it's biologically active. So that's how I would distinguish it.
Great. Awesome.
Hope that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
It's genuinely really fascinating, actually. When you think about soil, you just think, oh, that's the stuff in your back garden. But it is genuinely so much more than that. Because you've got various different grain sizes. I mean, take for instance, you're talking about very luckily getting your hands on some moon dust. You lucky devil. But yeah, you've got different grain sizes. I mean, moon dust is very, very, very fine.
Well, I didn't do much with it. I was mostly determining the particle size analysis.
Okay, it's neither
didn't
here
do
nor
any
there.
fancy chemistry or micro.
Oh well, you still had moon dust. Come on, you still had moon dust.
That's right. That's still exciting. I think so too.
But yeah, no, it just goes to show that what side of science you go down. It could the general average Joe, as it were, on the street may think, oh, soil science, that's just a sort of a very niche, very limited. But it can be really, you can go really deep into it, sort of how soil affects different biospheres, and the actual organic life within the soil can vary depending on where you're located around the world, and the grain sizes and things like that. It's fascinating, really is. So yes. We are greatly appreciative for your work in soil, and for sharing that knowledge with us. It's good to hear that from you. I'll move on to another question. So this one comes in from Ravi. We may not be able to do this as in depth because we don't have Joe, but we will give it a stab nonetheless. So this comes in from our good friend Ravi. Great to see you. He says, why are fossils of human and more developed creatures found above those less complex ones? Wouldn't the flood have caused them to be mixed up? Can anyone take a stab on that? Because I can't.
So is it a reflection of evolution, or is it a reflection of the depth death and deposition, this distribution with depth. Which is it? I can tell you today, when things die in a flood, having experienced many of them in the swamps of Louisiana, you see a deposition not based upon evolution, but upon their timing of death and their timing of deposition. So you've got the larger, more mobile creatures that are going to survive for many days into the flood. It's why we've got fossil tracks of dinosaurs escaping for the first several days. But those that are found in that bottom layer, they're not mobile. Plus, then you have deposition, which is going to be following a rate of their density and their size is the rate of their deposition. So when I look at the same data that someone from an evolutionary standpoint look at it, I look at it as a physicist. And what is Stokes' law going to govern their rate of deposition? That's going to be based upon their density. And then you add into it the fact of those that will escape for a while, those that are going to bloat and float for a while. That's what the fossil record demonstrates, not evolution, because the ones that we have are living fossils. Even those down at the bottom are still alive today without changing. So where's the evidence that they evolved from this layer to this layer to this layer?
And it's not a smooth transition anyway, is it?
No,
Glenn. No, you do find things mixed up, and John Mackay has
Yes.
presented that evidence on many occasions. You do find birds, owls, parrots, and things like that mixed in with the dinosaur rock layers. You find flowering plants. They've had to change their ideas on grasses that weren't supposed to have existed at the time of the dinosaurs, for example. But when you got sea creatures and seashells, for example, that are often, and trilobites that are identified in some of the so-called older rock layers, well, to my limited knowledge, I don't pretend to be a geologist, but obviously they're living in a different environment. That different environment was disturbed at a different place to where humans, for example, are living. So, you wouldn't expect necessarily for them to be dumped and deposited all mixed up together. But when you do find some of these things, evolution doesn't want to acknowledge it, runs away from them. I think of the example in Dennis Peterson's Encyclopedia of Creation, where they found humans in, I think, Dakota sandstone or something like that. 3 or 4 humans, supposedly tens, and it was ignored by science. And then they went back and investigated, and they said, it might have just been some people buried in a mining accident. Well, they found children as well in there. So, how many people take children in an underground mine that they didn't? And they were laid out, and they found in poses that you would imagine they've been buried sort of dramatically. So these things are ignored by science. But John would say that there are lots of human fossil remains from various geological sort of ages known in the museums.
Yeah. In the area where I live now, it's a lot of people with horses. That is the big thing. It's a kind of people retire, they move into this area, and they all have horses. And they're really fascinated when I show them the fossils of horse with fish. And none of them have pastures with fish in their pastures. So the fossil record is not a record of the chronology. It's not even a representation of the ecosystem in which they live. It only indicates the place of burial, not the place of their living or the time of their living.
Yeah, and that actually leads quite nicely to show you our put a comment in saying the fossil record is a record of death, not life. And that's a really key fact to remember here, because when you're dealing with fossils in the fossil record, you have you can look at, say, teeth from, say, a woolly mammoth, and it can tell you how an animal ate, but not not what it would eat.
Yes.
You could see that it would grind its food, and not necessarily what it would eat. Same thing with Tyrannosaurus, with the sharp teeth with serrated edge, but also with things like Iguanodon, or some other sort of more of the duck-billed dinosaurs as well, different teeth plates and things like that. It's the same thing with where you find them in the fossil record, and also you do find fossils jumbled up together in just like a not really, I mean, Joe's got a beautiful example in the museum of some ichthyosaur vertebrae that are not even connected; they're just disjointed, and they sort of seem like they've either floated down and just been buried where they've laid down onto sediment or what have you, or it's something else has happened to it. But it just shows where the animal has been buried exactly.
Yep.
And it's not it's not a stamp of this is life. It's a stamp of this is death. This is you are following death throughout the rocks. The only way we can see we can observe what animals are doing in sort of their behaviors, what they eat, and their social behaviors and things like that, is observing them in the wild today. For instance, looking at lions, they're pack animals. Or rather, I should say, pride of lion, shouldn't I? But these lions, they have a hierarchy status. We don't know necessarily for sure whether or not animals like Tyrannosaurus, were herd animals or pack animals or velociraptors or things like that. There's no sort of definitive proof. We can connect strings here and there, but there's no sort of, as far as I'm aware anyway, from a layman's term, there's no sort of arrow pointing to that. We can only sort of interpret what we can see in the rocks. And it appears that someone has a parrot, as it suddenly appeared on their sound. Anyway, we will circle round to something else.
That was outside in my garden. All the windows are open.
There you go. That's living in Australia for you. That's basically tropical wherever you go. There's also been some debate in the chat, and it has been asked of me to clarify something. So this comes in from Anne. I missed it because I had to step away, so I don't know what this is going on about. But could Diane just clarify what she said about 400 million years to help the chat going on here?
Oh, that was one of the supposed living fossils. Let me see if I can probably go back to that slide. If we... I'll
put the slides back up.
So thank you. I think the was the one about crustaceans. Let me see if I can go directly to it. Otherwise, we're just going to have to flip through them, which is a bit of a pain. Is that it? Has that come up?
Yeah,
crustaceans.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yes. Okay. This was. Maybe I didn't explain what crustaceans were. These little creatures here, crustaceans basically are shellfish. These ostracods are tiny, weeny little shellfish. So the journalist who wrote that article was using the common device for in headlines. Headlines are memorable if they are alliterative. So crustaceans against change. In other words, these crustaceans, these examples of them, have not changed. So that was where the 425 million years old came in. The fossils that they found of these little creatures were dated as 425 million years because the rock layer that they were found in had already been given that date. People don't date actual fossils themselves commonly. Most fossils are dated because they are found in a rock layer that's already been given that date, and that's another whole issue in itself as well. So that was the 425 million years old referred to this particular fossil which was given that date because it was found in a rock layer that had already been given that date. That was the Silurian. So remember, they were the Celtic tribe and the who lived up near Scotland. So hence the name.
But isn't that where the circular reasoning comes in, Diane? Because the
Yes,
rock layer was
indeed.
given that age because they found other fossils that fit in their evolutionary process, the predetermined sort of dating system by the fossils. That's become patently obvious to me as I've looked more and more into geology over the last few years, is that the rocks are dated at old age because of the fossils, and the fossils are dated at old age because of the rocks, and around it goes.
Yes,
Yeah.
so by the time they found these fossils, that rock layer had already been given that date. So when they found those fossils in them, they said, yes, these fossils are 425 million years old because they've been found in these Silurian rocks. But remember, Silurian refers to a place, not a period. The time has been imposed on the rocks. It doesn't come out of the rocks, and it doesn't come out of the fossils either. So does that answer the question? Or did it relate to it? Well, we've still got my slideshow up. Does that answer the question?
I should say so. The chap seems satisfied. There's a comment here about what about the pelican, Diane?
The pelican. Oh, well, let's go on to the pelican because that was the next thing we had. The pelican was dated as 30 million years old. Now, that may seem like a small fraction of these really old dates, like the stromatolites and the ostracods. But if you think of it in terms of the life cycle of these creatures, it's ridiculous amounts of time for them to stay the same if they're supposedly in this great evolutionary process that's meant to be going on all the time. So does that clear up anything?
I think we can probably safely put that to bed now.
If we've said something that's confusing, we like to clear it up. So
yes,
if that answers the question, that's good.
Yes. There we go. Hive Science said that was the slide I was talking about. Thank you. There we go. Perfect. It was just interesting, actually. I just want to sort of circle back to something that we discussed. Was about the to do with the rock layers. It's interesting because something that people quite often forget is that these rock layers, they span thousands upon thousands of miles in deposits. That some of the deposits stretch. I believe I'm recalling past. I'm going backwards in time in my mind to past creation conversations to try and pull up this information, but I believe I'm right in saying that these, like a single sort of deposit of, maybe Triassic or whatever rock, it spans across a good chunk of the United States, and even across from America over into Europe and things like that. So these deposits are massive, and it's worth bearing in mind that these deposits would have had to have been done at the same time. It can't have been sort of deposited a little bit in one area and then another bit, because then you would get layers of different rocks, and you would see breaks into where rocks would have formed and then stopped and then formed and then stopped, that sort of thing. And it's interesting when you look at it in that way. You can see that these dating methods that science uses currently, of you date the rocks, and then whatever you dig out of that rock is that date, because that's when that was buried. It doesn't necessarily add up when you compare it to the same deposit across even across the Atlantic. You might see layers appear before that layer that shouldn't be there, or layers that are missing, rather, I should say. And you see they're all jumbled up. It's fascinating. You can go really, really deep into this, but we don't have the time, unfortunately, today. So I would also...
We can some other time.
Go on.
I was just going to say, Diane, you mentioned 30 million years is really a short period of time. I just did a quick calculations. That's 750,000 generations of pelicans. which they would have had to
Goodness me.
change
Yes.
750,000 generations with no change.
Yeah, well, no, it's a very interesting point, because just simply mathematically, there would need to have been some form of mutation or adaptation or change or what have you over that period of time to see a gradual development. But that just simply isn't that. This is what really confuses me about evolution as a topic, and we'll probably sort of end on this. I think. I've always found it a bit confusing how it seems as if the way I've seen people online when I've been looking at Reddit or YouTube comments or what have you, trying to explain evolution and why things don't change, it almost comes across as if the animal either sort of decided not to change, as it were, because it didn't need to change. But that's not how genetics works. Genetic variations are random, and they can cause exactly, but it changes an animal over or even a human. I mean, just look, today, statistically, we are far more prone to both physical and mental illnesses than we were, say 50 or even 100 years ago. Just genetically, it just goes to show how much can change in so few generations, just by sort of small changes in DNA and things like that.
Well, mutation by definition is error.
Yeah, exactly.
Mutation by definition is a mistake.
There's not an addition of information, and also this harkens back to the point of where did information come from in the first place. Non-intelligence cannot create intelligence, if that makes sense. It's a bit of a sort of brain mangler of a statement, but even when you are talking about information on a purely just data level, it has to come from intelligence at some point to put that into effect. It doesn't sort of spring into existence because of random chemicals in this sort of I don't want to say it because it's a bit cheesy, but this soup of chemicals and
well, that's one of the things we'll look at next week.
Yes, exactly. Well, exactly. This brings me nicely into my segue to promote next week's stream. So thank you so much for that, Diane. Here we go. This is our next week's stream, The Origins of Life. We're trying new thumbnail designs designed by me. So please let me know if you like it, if you need me to tweak or change something. And yes, Glenn, I did get your email about adding you onto the cartoons at the bottom. So we will definitely look into adding you as soon as we can. But also just a reminder for you guys in the chat as well. We also have our app coming. We have the green light for the app. So this is going to be the brand new way of looking at creation research content. It'll live on your phone. It'll be available for iOS and Android. And basically the aim is it'll basically replace our current website, which is Creation Research Live. The site we have currently was set up sort of in a semi-rush, and it's very bare bones and basic, and it's not set up very well for subscriptions and things like that. So we're trying to change that, creating a brand new app from scratch. It'd be really great if we can get a whole bunch of people on the app sort of day one when it launches, and we'll keep you guys in the loop as to where we are with the app. It's going to be really, really good, especially for your walk in your faith. And also, if you're going to visit one of our museums, you'll be able to use it to scan QR codes and get a guided tour with Joe, or even a bit of information on a specific artifact, maybe a pot that you've seen in the UK museum, or maybe even a tree or a flower in Jurassic Ark in the what's the garden called again, Diane?
Jurassic Ark. Which garden? The
garden in Jurassic Ark. There's a name for it. Is it the Walk Through Creation Garden or something?
Well, the whole area is called Jurassic Ark. It includes
Yeah.
gardens and fossils, but the living fossil garden, yes.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, the living fossil garden. There you go. If you want a bit more information on that, you can just scan the QR code, and it'll come up with a whole bunch of information for you. But that's sort of all we really have time for, because we've come up to the 2-hour mark. So I want to thank everyone in the chat for coming and for tuning in. Remember, next week we are doing our deep dive into the origins of life, where we'll sort of tackle that big monster of a topic in 2 hours if we can. But thank you, Craig and Glenn and Diane, for coming on today. It's very much appreciated. And thank you from Joe as well, even though he can't be here because his laptop overheated. And please do send love and prayers to John, because he's certainly feeling the effects of that bug. So if you could keep him in your prayers, that'd be brilliant. But thank you so much, everyone. And Shogyuar, will the app work on a PC or just on phones? The short answer is technically yes. If you have a Windows PC, you may be able to sideload an Android app onto it. It's going to be very complicated to do so. So you would be better off with either a tablet, either an Android and iPhone tablet, or Apple tablet, iPad, or what am I talking about? It's late. Or a smartphone. So just to answer your question on that one. But thank you so much for tuning in. God bless, and we will see you next time.
Sam, keep reading your Bible and recording it.
Oh, yes, I will.
Yes,
I will
indeed.
read it.
Yes.
Yes, carry on with the Bible Journey
Forward to the
Challenge.
next episode.
Yes, next week, an update for the next installment of the Bible Journey Challenge. See ya.
See ya.
Goodbye.